Hi, everyone. Energy into it. And Dr. Suzanne Mance are here again today. We're excited to bring you another episode of Psyched Conversations, comparing notes between a psychic and a psychologist. We've been doing this series on YouTube for the last month or so, and we've recorded a few episodes, and we're having a great time talking to you guys, our audiences, about some of the commonalities and the differences that each of us experience in our respective practices. Suzanne Manser is a clinical psychologist, Harvard trained. Angela is a psychic medium, a consciousness mentor, and I am trained, but I'm also not held to the standards that Suzanne is with her license and certification. So we'd like to kind of like talk about these different things with you guys whenever we come here. And today is exciting. We plan to talk a bit about a concept that Suzanne and I talked about a few weeks ago. I remember reading or hearing that, when we experience an emotion, the actual amount of time that we're actually experiencing the emotion is very different than what we might think. Like I believe I read that it was fast moving. Um, and so Suzanne and I decided we're going to talk about this today and a little bit about kind of how to work with some of the different things that come up off of this topic wise. So, Suzanne, talk to us about this. What goes on? How long do we actually experience an emotion?
Yeah, so emotions, I mean, if I can say first, part of the reason that I think we wanted to talk about this today in part is because there is so much emotion going on right now in our country and our world, and we're all holding so much. And so to have some more understanding, more complete understanding of how emotions and feelings work, I think is going to be helpful for everybody, myself included, because I absolutely get caught up in all of the challenging emotions going on right now. So, just as a preface, I think it's really fascinating because we always talk, or most of us talk about feelings and emotions as if they're the same thing. I actually did not even know until kind of recently. I've been a psychologist for over 25 years. I didn't know until, I mean, probably in the last 5 years that they are separate. So, what happens is an emotion happens first, and an emotion is typically a sensation in the body. It could be, your heart suddenly starts beating faster, or you suddenly feel flushed, or you've got a feeling in your gut, but some sensation that shows up. And my understanding, and I'm no expert on this piece, but my understanding is that the emotional piece, the emotion, lasts just 90 seconds. If you kind of don't notice it, don't touch it, just let it do its thing, it wears itself out in about 90 seconds. But what happens is we subconsciously, typically, our brains notice that sensation and make some meaning of it. We create a story around it. So I'm feeling this feeling in my gut. I didn't even notice the feeling, but suddenly my brain's like, whoa, there's something dangerous happening. I need to be on guard about something. So my brain has just created this story about this sensation. And so now I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling scared or fearful. And that the feeling can last for as long as it lasts. It, lasts for as long as we're focused on it, basically, and for longer in some cases. But I think it's just really interesting, that distinction between this sort of body-based emotion, which wears itself out if we don't happen to notice it, and the feelings, which I think most of us are in so often these days, of, the story of what it means that our body is feeling the way that it feels.
Absolutely. Thank you for that preface. Yeah, right on with all of the emotions we're all feeling for sure. This is fascinating to me. What I hear you saying a bit is in my language. I'm going to feed it back to you this way. We have this experience in our body that might not even, like, I was surprised to hear you called it an emotion, but you were really referring to it more as a sensation in our body. And then the feeling becomes what I might say is the value that we attach to the sensation in our body, the meaning we make of it, right? And then we tumble it around in our head for however long.
Absolutely.
Wow. Wow. I think I thought that you were going to talk about emotions and maybe something about like neurotransmitters being part of that, right? So it's mind-blowing sometimes to hear this stuff and to really
Yeah.
process what that means for us. So what does that mean for us and how do you help your patients with this kind of realization in your practice?
Well, part of I mean, I think it's really fascinating that two people can have the exact same sensation in their body and interpret it differently. And so, your gut could feel the same as my gut in a
Mhm.
particular moment, and you interpret that as anxiety, and I interpret it as excitement or something. Um, and there's no right or wrong because it's an interpretation of a sensation. So
Mhm.
being aware that this interpretation layer is happening, I think gives us a lot more agency in how we manage our emotions and our feelings. Um, so when you have the idea is if you notice that you're having a feeling, so I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling scared or I'm feeling whatever, if I can sort of stop and put the story aside for a moment and just tune into what my body is experiencing,
Mhm.
if I can, it might not still be happening anymore, by the way. That initial gut feeling, if I could be feeling anxious 5 minutes later and the gut feeling is long over, but if I can trace it back to that gut feeling, or if I can notice the gut feeling quickly, then I can kind of focus more on that and what is that telling me? Maybe it's not telling me the same thing that my brain is telling me. Maybe I don't need to make such a big deal about it. Maybe it can just be a feeling in my body. And that,
Mhm.
changes the whole landscape of how we kind of go through the next 2 minutes, 5 minutes, the next day. So it can have such a big impact on not only that moment when the emotion and the feeling are happening, but then the aftermath based on the meaning that we made of it can have huge lasting impacts. So this is a place where we can really make a difference pretty quickly, but we have to have that moment of noticing the sensation before we get too wrapped up in the story. And
Mhm.
that's a challenge for a lot of us.
And how? I totally relate. And I love this because every time we talk, I learn so much, even as we're talking about it in live time. Thank you. You always help get my brain firing in exciting ways when we have these conversations. Yeah, empowerment is what another thing I'm hearing as you're talking about this, right? Is you're helping your patients, you're helping people to understand that if they can get a little bit of almost distance, I might say, or separate the sensation in their body, the emotion from the feeling, aka the story that they're trying to like make meaning of about it. If they can get some distance in there, then they can be in a more empowered state. This is where we're talking. I usually use the term internal boundaries when I talk to clients. If you can get to that place where you can feel into kind of some of that agency, you get a foothold in, oh, this is a sensation in my body. I don't have to go into this whole story, or, if you can get some distance there, then you can really get in there and start to make those deep changes, which is, I think, where the work is for all of this. And we see that for our clients across both of our practices. It's really cool.
That distance,
Distance.
that's exactly how I talk about it, is getting some distance from your thoughts and your feelings. And um, that internal boundary that you talked about, my language for that is observer self. And so I think about, or the way I sort of conceptualize it is there is a you that is sort of at the top of the hierarchy. And then there's the you that's caught up in feelings and the you that's caught up in thoughts and all the other parts. But there has to be, or we need to work on there being a you that can see that there's part of you that's caught up in feelings and that there's a part of you that's caught up in thoughts. And if that sort of observer self that sees all the rest of it, if that part of you can be in charge, which is really hard to do all of the time, especially when, big emotional things are happening. But if that part of you can be in charge, then you can sort of make some wise decisions about how you manage the feelings and emotions that show up and the thoughts that show up.
Absolutely. All hail the wise decisions. We all like to be able to make more wise decisions. I love that languaging of that. Yeah, gosh, that's beautiful. How often are your patients surprised by this? Like, how often are they like, wow, I never realized I could get some distance between the thing that I'm experiencing, the sensation, and what I think I was supposed to think about it?
It is, I just had a conversation today with somebody who is very surprised with this whole concept and I think still doesn't quite believe me yet, which is
Mhm.
totally fair. I get that. But yeah, the idea that we are, I mean, if you say to somebody, you are not your feelings, they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, duh, of course, I get that. But
Mhm.
when you make this distinction between how you're feeling and the fact that you notice that you're having a feeling, that's a whole new ballgame for people. And yeah, that is, I think, a big new piece of information for a lot of the people that I work with. And that's um, a lot of the work that I do is about managing thoughts and feelings by getting that distance and being in the observer mode. That really sets you up to be able to make wise choices and decisions about, you know, each moment of your day, theoretically. Um,
Mhm.
so to get back to your question, I think it is a surprise for a lot of people to realize that we're not just at the whim of our emotions and our feelings. We actually do have, I don't know about control over them, but we do have control over how we relate to them, is how I'll say it.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. What's coming up for me is as we're talking about this, is the fact that you and I both work with people and help humans that perhaps due to trauma or something, some other thing in their life, they're sort of comfortable coming out of their body, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that we both have clients in our practice that we help them to get back into their body, to feel comfortable and safe getting back into their body before perhaps they can even get to this concept that we're talking about identifying with sensations in their body, and then not going too long into story, recognizing its story, getting that separation, being in that observer self, using those internal boundaries, as I like to call them. And that's where I think some of this comes in sometimes is it's also tricky with clients who, if they have spent a lot of time out of their body and avoiding a lot of those feelings, they might kind of err on the side of being way in that story and way into the feelings for a long time, right? And so, and how do you deal with that as a practitioner, right? Like, where's that fine line of like, okay, I'm going to encourage the patient to feel their feelings for a while, even though if they were a different patient, I might have steered them away from that sooner. Tell me about that for you with your patients, please.
Yeah, that can be tricky because everybody has a different level, different capacity for tolerating hard feelings when they walk in my door. So, kind of as odd as it may sound, I often start with the five senses. I often
Mm,
start with, hey, let's just notice some things that you can see. Tell me about some things that you can see in this office. And I'll ask about, just notice a sound that you can hear. Now notice a quieter sound that you can hear. And it it's really interesting when you ask somebody to notice sounds, their brain flips from whatever they were focused on, and suddenly they're very focused on the present moment and whatever is happening kind of in the room. And so it's a really pretty quick and lovely way to get people very present and at least in their senses, if not necessarily in their felt body. So it's often a good start to just get people comfortable with being here in the
mhm,
present moment. And then
mhm,
I'll do things like I'll have people focus on their big toe. Like not a
mhm,
very threatening part of one's body, usually, not a very threatening sensation. But I'll have people focus on their big toe. I'll have people focus on their tongue, like just
mhm,
weird, their ear, weird things. But again,
mhm,
it's a non-scary way of getting people to just get familiar with what it feels like to be in their body. And then we can work towards, when we're having a conversation, if I notice that they suddenly maybe did something like this or had a reaction that suggests an emotion or a feeling just went through, I will have them stop and ask. I won't ask about um, the feeling. I'll ask them what they the words are tricky. I'll ask
mhm,
them what they felt in their body. So not
mhm,
sad, but how did your body feel just now? I noticed something shift in the way that you looked.
mhm,
Did you feel something in your tummy? Did you feel something in your chest?
mhm,
Um, and so again, it's sort of a gentle, gradual approach
mhm.
to just starting to calmly, gently notice what's happening in a person's body.
I love that. Very non-threatening, very safe. And I have a question. When you have them tune into sounds, do you also have them close their eyes? It depends on the patient.
Um, I don't think I do,
Okay,
actually. Why do you
just
ask?
curious. Because I wanted to close my eyes when you said that to really tune into it, right? And I know with the work that I do as a psychic and even just with meditation and when I'm encouraging people to learn psychically, I often encourage them to close their eyes because it can put us from that beta brainwave state into the alpha brainwave state near instantly, right? And so that's why I asked that question because for me, I think it's part of what I do if I'm trying to tune into my senses. And so it that's where it brought me when you were talking about it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, why don't I? And I think the answer is because I always have them look for things first. I do
Hmm.
what you can see, what you can feel, what you can hear. So
Hmm.
I'm always having them look first.
Hmm.
I'll think about that.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's really helpful to hear. I what I see with my clients in my practice a lot, and so it gets a little trickier as a psychic medium if they're coming for a one-off session versus a body of work. You're working with someone on some stuff for some months, some weeks, and possibly months and possibly years. So a little bit different nature of our client base with this kind of stuff. And I notice and see often how frequently we humans can attach to the story or the feelings of something, similar to when I've been guilty of this. We all sort of do this as humans, I think, is, when something's happened, we're so in the story that we keep repeating the story, right? Do you have any helpful tips for me, for my clients, for any of us on how you help shift people out of the feelings or the story, as we're also calling it, and kind of back to topic?
I'm trying to think about how to answer that question kind of concisely. One, there's a category of intervention that I do called cognitive diffusion, and it's the idea
Mm,
that we tend to be fused with our thoughts. And it's often illustrated as, we're fused with our thoughts. So all I can see is the thought that's right in front of my face is my hand. But if I defuse from it, now I can see the thought, but I see everything else too. So if if I'm working with a patient on their story, um, there's a this sounds so simple, but it tends to blow people's minds sometimes the very first time we go through this. I'll ask them essentially, what are you thinking about right now? And they'll say something. And I'll
mhm,
say, okay, so repeat after me. I'm having a thought that I don't know what to have for dinner, let's just say. So they say, I'm having a thought that I don't know what to have for dinner. So now there's a little bit of distance between them and that
mhm,
thought. They're noticing or they're having the thought. The next step is to say, I notice I'm having a thought that I don't know what to have for dinner. And then you can take it even further. I realize I'm
mhm,
noticing that I'm having a thought. And so it's sort
mhm,
of different stages or levels of distance from the thought. And so it
mhm,
helps to put you in that observer place, that internal
mhm,
boundary, connect you to that internal boundary, and see that the story is a story, a thought, as opposed
mhm,
to the truth.
mhm.
Um, I'm curious if you know this, there's a mindfulness exercise, or sometimes it's called a meditation called Leaves on the Stream. Is that something you've heard of, Angela? I
Mm-mm. When you get
recommend
into the
every,
story about it, I might, but no, when you say it off the jump, I don't recognize it. Please go ahead.
okay, I won't go into the whole thing, but I recommend Google it if you're interested for everybody who's listening. It's for therapists, most therapists know this, but it's a an exercise where you have people imagine that they're standing next to a stream and they watch leaves come down the stream in their
Mhm,
imagination. And so you get practiced at watching the leaves come down the stream, but not picking up the leaves. So you're just watching them come down. And after you
mhm,
do a few iterations of this, you turn the leaves into thoughts essentially. So you
mm,
you watch your thoughts show up in your brain, but instead of picking them up and
mhm,
examining them and doing something with them, you just let them kind of flow right on by. And that's another really nice strategy for helping people see their thoughts as thoughts that they can choose not to engage with, that they can choose not to, create a whole long story about,
mhm,
if it's not a helpful thought. So those are
Hmm.
two of the ways that I help people to try to notice that their story is there and is just a story.
That's beautiful. Thank you for both of those. Those are so helpful. And the leaves on the stream reminds me of how I was sort of taught to meditate, where you're watching your thoughts go by as clouds in the sky. Similar concept, but on the water with the leaves. So yeah, I love that. That makes complete sense to me. Nice. One of the things that I do, and I think you've heard me say this in the work that we do together, is I try to help students, especially if they're working with me longer term, similar to how your clients are with you, but different purposes, obviously, different. One's therapeutic, one's teaching. I'm teaching, you're in therapy. Sorry, just trying to make that distinction and keep that distinction as respectfully, of course. Um, is absolute thinking. So sometimes if I hear someone going into story, even if it's not a ton of story, but it might be that their languaging of the story is absolute thinking. One of the ways that I help them to interrupt that train of thought and help them to kind of get into their neuroplasticity and create some change is if they say, I always do this. Oh my God, I can't tell you how many times I've locked my keys in the car. It's always when I come home from the grocery store, right? Like they're going into something like that. And I'll encourage them to say, historically, I've locked my keys in the car whenever I get back from the grocery store. And something about the grocery store must just set me off because it's historically that's when it happens, right? And even just employing like a different word in their story gets them to pause for a second and think before they say the new word so that they can start to get some of that distance from the story, the feelings, etc., and be in more of that observer state. So I've had some success with clients just really working on language that's less absolute in how they recount things as a pathway and a mode towards bringing in that neuroplasticity. We know that we can change our brain with our thoughts and our emotions and these things that we're talking about. And the how to is lost on humans often, which is again another part of why we're doing this work. So we can help share a lot of the things that we like to share with our clients and patients and our practices with, the larger world and be a resource point for people on some of these tips. Yeah, interesting.
I think that I'm just reflecting on what you just said, and I love that idea of um, just creating a little bit of a change, a different word, but of course, there is a pause before you remember that word. And that pause, I talk about the pause all the time in my work. You have to have
Mm,
the pause. It's that distance that we were referring to earlier. You have to have the pause for your observer self or your internal boundaries to kick in. And I love the idea of you're not even focused on the pause in that one, you're focused on the different word. And so, yeah, anyway,
mhm.
I think that's great. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm gonna use that.
Excellent. Do it. Yeah. Thinking about the word ushers in the pause. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Naturally. It's so
Hmm.
helpful. And it also just illustrates how small changes can lead to vast shifts in positive ways for all of us. Once they start thinking about it. And then they feel differently in their body too. Yeah.
That's so, I mean,
So
that is the Sorry, I was just going to
no,
say
go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's the immediate payoff is when we were talking about
Mhm,
feelings and emotions before, when you can pause and get rid of story or at least put story to the side and just be in
mhm,
your body, which is so challenging for so many people for so many reasons. But when you can do that,
mhm,
as you said before, it gives you a sense of empowerment, it gives you a sense of um, connection and I think I'm saying the same thing that you've been saying, but I'm just like getting all excited about the connection to self, whether it's understanding your
mhm,
story or feeling your body. It's so foundational to
mhm,
all of the work that we do, both of us. So I'm
mhm,
just, I guess,
mhm.
appreciating in real time that what we're talking about really does make a difference.
It does. And I love geeking out on things like the joy of it all. It's all good. It's welcome here for sure. You know that. Oh, exciting. So we've talked about a lot with the emotions and the feelings and nodding a bit towards, creating that change in our brains and neuroplasticity, right? Like we know it's hot. We know neuroscience is hot. You and I both like to geek out on it in the ways that we do. Um, you said something to me recently, though, talking about the parts of the brain that are actually part of this, right? Like if we're say coming out of fear, sorry, I'm already doing the motions to try to illustrate it.
Yeah.
Do you want to go into some of that?
Yeah, so I think it's so helpful to understand, and I know you do too, what's happening in the brain when all of this is happening, because it really does make a difference in what we choose to do. So there's a strategy that is the simplest strategy in the world, but when you're feeling an emotion, you name it. So if
Mm-hmm.
I am feeling anger, I say, I am feeling anger. Just name it. That's all that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds so simple and like, why would that do anything? But what happens when you name the emotion is you're moving the energy. So when you're emotional, when you're feeling the emotion, your limbic system, the emotional part of your brain, is activated. If you're anxious, for example, your amygdala, which is the threat center, is
Mm-hmm.
activated. I'm an anxious person, so my amygdala gets lots of exercise. But when you're in the emotion center of your brain, the thinking center of your brain is not very engaged. So what happens when you name
Mm-hmm.
an emotion is you're kind of forcing the energy to go from the emotional center, the limbic system or the amygdala, to the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that can make good decisions and has impulse control and good judgment and good thinking and all of that. So it allows you to kind of get out of the panic of the emotion and start to what some therapists call wise mind, start to get into wise mind, the idea
Mm-hmm.
of being able to just think about the emotion and think about how you want to handle the emotion rather than just having like a knee-jerk reaction to it. So that recognizing that there's a thing that you can do as simple as naming it, which moves the energy from the emotional center of the brain to the prefrontal cortex, which helps you think, once I understood that, that made a huge
Mm-hmm.
amount of difference for me. And my first step now is I name the emotion, and that's
Mm-hmm.
whatever happens after that. But if I name the emotion, and it helps me to have the space and the ability to do something with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What's coming up for me as you say, I'll share all of this too, is that so there's some value to intellectualizing our emotions, is what I've been wanting to say to you, right? I never thought about it that way. That is part of how the emotions and the thought, like we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions. You and I both know that and talk to our clients about that all the time. But there's, you just illustrated and demonstrated the value of intellectualizing or bringing into thought by naming the emotion, how to move things through our brain so that we can work with them in different ways and likely maintain balance in all of the ways in our brain too. Wow, fascinating to name it.
Yeah, and I think, in what I see often is people who are, and this is actually me 100%, people who are fully intellectualizing, meaning they don't feel the feeling anymore.
Hmm.
They can talk about it, but they don't feel it.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
obviously not what we're going for because that's just
Right.
intellectualizing. And so
Hmm.
being able to touch both at the same time,
Hmm.
that's the goal.
Excellent. So that was a beautiful segue, totally unplanned, into one thing that I wanted to raise in the context of this conversation today, and that kind of comes out of my world. Thank you, Suzanne. God, you've been sharing so much with us. I really appreciate it, hearing your experiences, your knowledge, and all of the ways that it can help humans, and thinking about ways that I can feather in a lot of the things you've shared already to help my clients too. Quantum physics. Right. So I love to geek out on that too, and one of the beautiful things about quantum physics, yes, it's still housed in theoretical physics in terms of its topic and subject and all of that, because all of this stuff is largely in theory. And one of the pieces of research that's at the root of quantum physics is the double slit experiment, which was actually done in 1801. It wasn't done as recently as people realize. The first time it was done was in the early 1800s, and it has been replicated, by physicists since, as we know. And part of what the double slit experiment illustrates is that energy doesn't always move in the ways that we think it will. is how I would say it, right? That's how I would sort of paraphrase some of the double slit experiment, right? So it's about how they put two different qualities of light, one's a particle, one's a wave, through their scientific rigor, and everyone would have expected that they would both kind of show up on the other side or show up in the other, as they were, and they saw that they changed, right? Like, and so it's mind blowing for its potential in that let me back up a little bit here. Quantum physics is about things that are really, really, really small, right? So Newtonian physics, physics as we know it in the Western world and 21st century, 20th century, those of us that lived in the 20th century, is all about bigger objects and how things like move through space, right? We know Einstein's E equals mc squared, right? Energy equals matter. I forget the rest of the equation, but basically it's about, things moving through space, like bigger things. And quantum physics is about these really tiny things like electrons and positrons and quarks and, as small as we can detect now. And so there's a lot of discussion, obviously, in physics departments and things about like the validity, how, one to the other. And so this double slit experiment is really helpful because it gives theoretical quantum physics a place to kind of ground into and work from, which is kind of where it's been for a while and what a lot of people in my field talk about. And the way that it's most readily extrapolated out into pop culture would be through things like, let me lean back for a second. One of the tenets of quantum physics is that one of the things we've learned is that everything is energy and vibrating and moving all the time. Things are far less static than we could have imagined. Even like my desk that I'm working on, right? We have this perception that it's hard and firm and solid. And quantum physics reminds us and teaches us that everything's always moving. And so things are a lot less solid than we think. So back to the extrapolation from quantum physics into kind of consciousness and where we are now, think about the movie The Secret from, the mid 2000s or late early aughts to mid 2000s or so, whenever it came out, and the law of attraction, and this concept and this tenet, and I say this all the time to my clients, we get more of what we focus on, period. When we focus on things, we're going to draw more energy to it. We're going to draw, we put our focus and our attention there. It's going to pull in all this other energy. And so I think it's an interesting consideration, even in the context of what we've been talking about with emotions and feelings. I don't like it if people sort of try to use it to bypass other important things that are important for us to kind of process through our bodies as we're, becoming better humans. And I do like, this concept that to work with the concept that we can be that empowered in our agency to really hold our focus and our attention as a valuable tool that it is versus anyway, so that's where I like to kind of work with it, is to remind people that it's not healthy to just put things behind a door and ignore them. I don't mean for it to be used in that way, in an unhealthy way, but in healthy ways, I find it can remind me to come off of story sooner from ranting about something, or even with, you alluded to what we're all dealing with now with a whole lot of information and a whole lot of emotions flying around and a whole lot of realities kind of changing, perceptions changing as a result of all the stuff that's going on in the news, but also all around the globe with where we are right now in February of 2026. And so I wanted to just share a little bit about that and kind of talk about quantum physics and that everything is energy and this concept that we get more of what we focus upon. And so wield our focus, our intention, and our focus and our attention as though it's as valuable as it is, because it is the gateway into changing our thoughts, working with our neuroplasticity, helping to our brains to be healthier and more powerful and empowered. Anyway, I know I've said a lot, but I wanted to be sure to talk about that a bit today.
It's so interesting, Angela, because I don't know much at all about quantum physics. I wish I had the time to really get into it. I, as you were saying all of that, I was thinking about it through the lens of neuroplasticity, which is what I know, and the idea of you get more of what you focus on. Um, I guess neuroplasticity wise, with the idea that, in terms of how the brain works, when you focus on something, whether it's good, bad, or neutral, the brain assumes that it must be important because you're focusing on it. And therefore, it creates a bunch of neural connections about it. It, widens the landscape dedicated to that topic. And then not only that, but now it also starts looking for more information about that topic. So you literally get more in that way of what you focus on, just in terms of, a single person. But the idea I think that people don't realize, and you're speaking to this, and this is I think so important, is so many people are focusing on crappy stuff and not realizing how much they're attracting to them, whether it's through quantum physics or through neuropsych. But the idea of, if I am focusing on how anxious I am, which I can very easily do, if I focus on how anxious I am, not only does my brain increase the landscape dedicated to anxiety, but it now kind of looks for more evidence that I should feel anxious or more things to feel anxious about, which obviously only creates a feedback loop. Um, and so I'm curious, Angela, with quantum physics, is it the same in terms of feelings? Like how I'm feeling, if I focus on that, I will get more of that quantum physics wise, because I only know like the secret, like,
Yeah,
and this
yeah,
is silly, but like if I focus on money, I'll get more money or something like that. So
yeah.
I don't know it in this realm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, thank you. I'm just, I'm a visual thinker, so I'm always looking around and not a camera when I'm thinking about things that you're saying to me. So, yes, I mean, it explains just what you said with our neuroplasticity and the landscape of the brain and how it just like all goes, oh, this is important. This is what we're focusing on. Yes, that is the nature of the quantum physics model. Is that it draws more resources to that, whether it's more electrons or positrons or other things. And this the concept that so many of us know to be true in practice, thoughts become thoughts or things. It's true. It's just you just illustrated it from a neuropsych perspective. And so yes, it absolutely affirms that. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier, but now's the perfect time to bring it up, is there's a part of quantum physics that talks about the observer effect. And that gets bastardized by people, by myself and people in my industry. So I'll talk a little bit about that to the extent that I know it, because I'm not a physicist by training. Psychology degree, master's certificate in holistic psychology. So not a science person over here. Um, in the experiment, they found that like the presence of someone watching changed the outcome at its most basic level. And so there's a suggestion that in general, right? Like if someone else comes into a room and observes something, it then changes the whole thing. Even if they're not, like, for instance, say somebody walked in and saw the double slit experiment going on, we'll work with that. And so just their mere presence could potentially change the outcome of the experiment, right? Which to me, the way that I connect the dots in my brain is like, well, yeah, they come in with all their energy and all, like we're all powerful and we all have this energy going on all the time. So of course they're going to come in and it's going to shift things in the room. There's more molecules of this. Like to me, it makes sense. And unfortunately, the way that it gets a little bit bastardized and such in my field is really just sometimes I think people give too much weight to that. And I think that what I'm coming around to as we're talking today is I think there's a lot of value in this concept when we're thinking about getting distance between, say, emotions or the physical sensation and the feelings or the story, right? Is to remember that even just I feel like it affirms our empowerment as the observer. When you talk about our observer self and I talk about internal boundaries, this is the positive aspect of this observer effect from quantum physics, is that we can actually stand there and go, okay, I'm here. I can have a difference in the energy of this, right? Like we can lean into some of the empowerment pieces that could naturally come, at least in my mind, they naturally come forward in my knowledge when I talk about this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. That's really, really interesting. I hadn't ever thought about it through that lens before.
Yeah. And so, in psychic development, people say that all the time. And when they come to me for a reading, well, isn't us talking about this and you looking at this going to change the outcome of what happens? Yep, probably. At a very basic level, yes. And certainly people can, yeah, because we're kind of looking at this, the work that I do and the work that you do are so different and so similar. But so, when I'm in a session for someone with a reading, I'm looking up this way because it's how where I naturally look at holograms coming through in the air in response to my clients' questions is how I do my readings. And so I'll say, okay, what are you here for today? What are we looking at? Or what's first on the list? And they'll talk about a scenario that they're in and asking kind of spirit and the guides that I access what the situation looks like. Can I show them different aspects of it? And so that's what I mean. People, and then so every once in a while, people are like, so if I come to you and start talking about, wanting to win a lottery, is it going to help? And I'm like, I can't say either way that would necessarily help, right? I don't want to take on gravity responsibility in something so quantum physics-y or etheric, right? But yeah, in theory, if people are weighing in on things, and when you think about that as we walk through life in human ways, when we go take our story to friends and family and get their advice, well, one of the most important and potentially damning ways that can affect things is that, just like we've talked about, it can keep it in our body longer and really do harm to us. And of course, we can then conceptualize how bringing more people into the story is going to probably change our perception of it. Yeah.
Gosh, I have nothing helpful to say at the moment, except I feel like my brain is exploding with like, oh man, I need to like go sit and think about this. And like, there's a lot to process with this.
Yes, and thank you, because that's a little bit of a spontaneous where Angela's brain goes sometimes when I'm like soapboxing. I'm just like talking a lot and going to lots of places, so I feel you.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we've covered so many really helpful topics for our listeners today. And gosh, thank you so much for your grace in sharing tools and helpful tools throughout our conversation for people to use. And when I was thinking about what I might be able to offer from that realm, really meditation is what came up and forward for me. Meditation is a big generalization. And as I mentioned earlier, meditation is a great space for us to sit down, and as we learn how to meditate and do meditate, it's a great place for us to get some distance from the feelings and the thoughts too, and to sort of see them drifting through the sky as clouds or the leaves on the stream, as you so eloquently said. And so one of the things I would say to our listeners is, first of all, it doesn't feel normal to meditate for a lot of people. And it doesn't feel easy for a lot of people to sit down and quiet their mind or quiet their bodies or quiet their emotions. And so if you're somebody that's listening that has not had success with meditation, or you're not sure where to start, or it scares you, or any of the things that could come up for you hearing this, I encourage people to pay attention to what their mind and their feelings are doing and perhaps step into mindfulness exercises first, right? So they might prefer to start by like washing the dishes as a way that I'm going to kind of empty my thoughts and get into the routine of what I'm doing, right? And to start to move some things around in their brain in a way that meditation can be helpful with, right? So mindfulness would be a great precursor to meditation. And then the other thing is I recommend people as more of a starting point to perhaps listen to a guided meditation, because when you're listening to, you have to like the sound of the person's voice. Please don't keep listening. There's so many meditations all over, everywhere, apps, YouTube, everywhere, that just go find one that you like the sound of the person's voice. And that helps to focus your mind in a way that can help the other stuff fall away, similar to like doing the dishes in a mindfulness practice might. So I don't want people to feel overwhelmed when I'm recommending meditation as a tool for these intense times that we're in. So if you're not there yet, consider mindfulness practices, or a guided meditation as more of an entryway into meditation to support yourselves at this intense time.
I love all mindfulness meditation. It's such a if you can get out of your own way, because so many people are like, oh, but I can't do it, I can't get quiet. And for me as a therapist, the point is not to empty your mind or have it be quiet necessarily. I actually love when your brain wanders and you bring it back to whatever you're focusing on in a mindfulness meditation. For me, that act is where it's at. Like that's where the money is. So I always like get excited when that happens for people. So for what that's worth. But I think the idea of being willing to do a mindfulness exercise or a meditation, even for like 2 minutes, just to create the space for feelings to show up
Mm.
or thoughts or whatever, but creating space so that things will show up because that's how our selves work. And be willing to not necessarily see it as a problem that something has shown up, but just like, oh yeah, I'm doing something with it. I'm working with it. I'm just trying to move it over here for a little bit, or I'm just trying to get it to be quieter for a little bit. I think the idea of just like playing with it and having it be sort of a play space at first can also kind of take the pressure off.
Agreed. I love that. Approaching it with more delight and curiosity and allowing it to be play in those ways. Yeah. Beautiful. Anything else that you would like to share with our audience today, Suzanne, before we close?
So many things, but we don't have time. I'm like, well, I have like 14 more strategies that I would like to suggest, but there is not time. But I just do want to say that I really do appreciate this conversation about, I think we, especially now when feelings are so heavy,
Mhm,
our go-to tends to be to try to avoid feelings.
mhm.
And our stories make that a really hard, and then the fact that life is happening and life comes with feelings makes that really hard. And so if we can be willing to sort of break feelings down into emotions and feelings and be willing to have them, be willing to be curious about them, and be willing to do a little bit of work to get some distance from them so that we can work with them. It just makes it it makes it more possible, I guess. It makes it more realistic to think about feelings as part of our experience, but separate from ourselves, and something that can does certainly enhance our experience as humans, but things we don't have to be compelled by. I think the compelling nature of feelings is really wonderful if it's a fun feeling, but really challenging if it's a not fun feeling. So the idea that you can get some space from them and work with them and not be so scared by them. I think if people can get that message, that is huge.
Beautiful. You've heard it here, Dr. Suzanne Manson. No, I love that. I love that. That's beautiful, Suzanne. Thank you. All right, you guys. Thank you so much to our audiences for being here with us both. It's been a joy and a delight, and we would love feedback or ideas. If there are things you guys would like us to talk about, feel free to drop comments down below. We're totally open to suggestions for content material that you'd like to hear us talk about and discuss in this venue. Wishing you all grounded and peaceful days as best that you're able to muster at this time on the planet. This has been Psyched on Friday, February 13th is when we're recording 2026. Thank you guys. See you later, Suzanne.
Bye, Angela.